doing?
Good. Happy summer. It's pouring out here.
Is it really?
Yes.
It is really humid where we
Uh-huh.
are, but no rain yet.
Well,
But it feels like summer finally. It finally feels like summer. I've been freezing for a couple of days, so I've been over it.
I am freezing, as you can tell by my turtleneck. It is
Are you? Do
cold.
you run cold? Do you run cold, Ellen, like me?
Are you joking? I am always cold. It's like
Ah, that's why
it's
you
such
need
a
sleeping
joke.
socks. You need sleeping
It's a
socks.
joke on I think not. Everyone always makes fun of me because I'm so cold. Because
I
one
should.
time,
Uh-huh.
this is what happens on a podcast. You say something one time and you are held to that because I said, well, because like I'm really like small and I get cold. And that, oh man, I have been paying for it. Everyone's like, oh, are you so tiny? Why are you so cold? Yes, I am always cold. I
I
don't
am
know if
always cold. I am always cold. Even, I mean, like, no amount of back fat is protecting me. So I don't know.
and you're disappearing right in front of my eyes. So
No, I'm looking pretty much
that's
the same. But anyway, sleeping socks for all of us everywhere. That's how it's gonna go now. But yeah, it is summer and you're wearing a turtleneck.
yeah.
Okay, that's concerning. So excited about today's episode.
I am excited and confused and perplexed, and I have been
Mm.
giving our guests shit about it for a
We can
couple
blame
of.
her.
Yeah, I was
We
like,
can blame her. She
"What?
picked
Oh
it.
my gosh, this case! Oh my gosh, it's got no solution."
Listen, this is the case that like it's when people hear what it is, y'all have heard you've all heard about the case. But I didn't know a lot of the details. All I knew was like this is a really famous unsolved cold case. And we know it by its like this moniker, right? That's not even like the name of the actual victim.
Some would argue it is the most perplexing unsolved case of like for forever. I mean, it's kind of like
Past
the
century.
one, yeah.
Yeah, probably. All right, so should we introduce our guest?
Go for it.
All right. Yeah, let me do the introduction because she's my friend. Maybe you'll be friends with her one day too, Ellen, if you're lucky.
I hope she'll be my friend.
Yeah, I hope so too. All right. We have on the show, not just my friend, but a friend of the podcast and folks who watch us on Instagram and who have listened to us on Patreon. Like, she's been on before. I mean, in different ways, but not as a guest, not as a primary guest. So I'm very excited to welcome this week, Sarah Cailean. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Sarah, I'm so excited that you're here, mostly because I love listening to you talk, and I feel like I can just lean back and I can just be like, go, take it away, Sarah. You know more than probably Rabia and I put together, and I'm so excited about that.
Well, and that and I just talk too much. And
No, never.
I've heard that my entire life. Every report card I ever got was, "It's a joy to have in class. Talks too much. Works really hard. Talks too much." So
I did leave Sarah a message this morning on WhatsApp saying your voice note took me 3 days and 18 attempts to get through because it was that long. But anyway,
Sarah, do you have ADHD?
I do, and I'm on the autism spectrum as well, and so I'm pretty good at reading the room, but every once in a while, actually not every once in a while, like I interrupt constantly. I'm almost 50, and this is something I'm still like. I promise I'm still working on this.
No, same.
But it's
I've never noticed except for on WhatsApp.
I would just like to give a shout out to all our friends out there who are listening that got a report card that says talks too much in class. What up? Talks too much in class.
and
Robbie
like
is
you,
sitting there.
Ellen,
One of these things is not like the other. Yeah, was not me.
Yeah. No, well, I went into theater before I did any of this other stuff, so I was a theater kid, like you, Ellen. So,
Well, let me tell our listeners some of the other stuff that you've done, or the stuff why I even know you, frankly, and then we'd love to talk. I want to talk about the theater stuff too. So, for folks who are not in the know, Sarah is a former law enforcement officer turned cold case investigator, and I first connected with Sarah a few years ago when I was investigating a case for undisclosed, and I literally it was a kind of a cold call. I was like, hey, you want to work this case with me? And she's like, yep. We met up and we spent days in a car together, driving around, looking for witnesses. I mean, like, but her investigative instinct, ever since then, I have gone back to Sarah over and over to talk. And we've got some other stuff we want to do together. We always have cases we want to look at. And of course, I was doing a wrongful conviction, but the flip side of the wrongful conviction is that means there's an unsolved murder. So it's a cold case, right? But what's actually even more exciting right now is the fact that Sarah comes to us at a time when she is not just a cold case investigator, she is the host and co-producer of a chart-topping true crime podcast called Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom? How long have you been on the top of the chart, Sarah? I know you know this.
We were really fortunate to get some early traction. The show launched February 22nd. It was 8 weeks, one episode a week for 8 episodes. And we kind of, after about week 3, we sort of started noticing that we were in like top 5, top 10 of true crime. We were, pretty consistently doing well in like the top 20, 25 of all podcasts. And I'm going to end up having to shout out another podcast here, guys. I apologize. But we just started to kind of dip out of the charts.
But you were also topping not just the true crime charts. You were topping the regular charts.
We were doing really well. We were very lucky. It was primarily word of mouth. It was definitely Rabia and Ellyn, you guys have been so generous with talking about it on your Facebook group and stuff, and I've been really excited to interact with people on there. And then a couple of days ago, Georgia Hardstark mentioned the podcast and did a post about it on Instagram as well. And so I woke up one morning to see that we had shot back into the top 10 again. Yeah, so we're feeling really lucky, and mostly I'm just excited to have people hear it. I know it sounds crazy, but it's an almost 30-year-old case, and we're still getting tips. This is an active investigation, and the more traction we have and the more ears we have on it, the more we're able to do with what we have in the field.
I would also just like to say, it's funny that I'm gonna correct you, but I'm gonna say I understand, because there is an element to luck in podcasting. It's getting, the right ears and everything, but it really is more than luck. It is your work, your hard work, your persona, your intelligence. So I will let you have a little bit of luck, but you also have to take some of that credit for yourself, because luck can only take you so far.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah. But it's so funny, because that is something I would say too. But when I hear other people say it, I'm like, no, you deserve that. That's not luck. Don't give the universe credit for that shit.
Well, that's very kind. I do appreciate that. We're really proud of it. The team at Discovery ID and the team at Arc Media who produced it. We're really proud of it. We worked really hard. It was a very small team. This was a skeleton crew on a shoestring budget. And so we are really proud of what we were able to say about this case, and maybe more to the point, what it says about these types of case in like a broader context. And that's one of the reasons I picked the case that I did for this episode.
We are definitely going to talk about the similarities between this case and your case. I just want to say, when I first met Sarah, the very first time I met Sarah, and she told me I've been working on this case for a number of years, completely for zero money, pro bono. I'm paying out of pocket to do the work, hoping it can actually get to air, get some media around it, get some attention to help solve this cold case. And I was just so incredibly impressed and so happy to see that all come to fruition in the last year. Also, you think My Favorite Murder gave you a bump? Wait till Rabia and Ellyn's bump.
That's
right.
Ellyn? Absolutely. When I saw you guys up on the Times Square billboard, I was so excited and also so envious. So I'm very grateful for any reach that you guys could give me.
Yeah, I think everyone is really excited. I think that all of our guests have been so different in so many different ways. And I think people have really been wanting to have someone in law enforcement. And you're that perfect combination of law enforcement and entertainment. So I think you're the perfect Venn diagram for our demographic.
I appreciate that. I was watching an old episode of Saturday Night Live earlier. It was Gerard Carmichael's episode, and he, right in his opening monologue, he's like, I am the least famous person to ever do SNL. And I felt the same way. I was like, me too. I am the least famous person to ever do Rabia and Ellyn. So I feel like I'm in good company with Gerard Carmichael, but there. Yeah.
Most of the time, Rabia and Ellyn are the least famous people on the show, so it's okay. Sarah, just join
us. I'm like a distant fourth. But so before we jump into the case, our little game that we play, and that's called Basic Things.
Yep.
And it could be about anything. Sometimes you never know what's going to come out of my mouth. Mostly her mouth. You know, she is a feisty one. You have to keep your eye on her.
Oh, I
All right,
know.
all right, Rabia, go ahead.
You go first, Ellen, because I got to think about it. The thing is, a lot of questions that I have in my head, I'm like, I know the answer to that. So I got to
You
like
already
come up
know
with something.
that? Yeah,
I
it's the
know. I know
problem.
Sarah too well. You go first, Ellen. Let me think.
Okay, what is your biggest pet peeve in the true crime space?
Oh, I think I know the answer to this.
So, like, I think for the serious answer, or I mean, they're both serious answers, but the most frustrating answer is there is an element of true crime that I think is very much just it's like voyeurism true crime, and I understand there's an audience for that. That frustrates me because I think that is the aspect of it that gives the entire genre a bad reputation. And the fact is, true crime as an overall genre has done tremendous good in the world. People don't realize that stuff like the burning bed, which led directly to domestic violence law, was a true crime story. You know what I mean? Like there's all these examples of it. So the voyeurism true crime gets a little frustrating. The thing, I swear to God, my biggest pet peeve though, when I'm just watching, because I am an avid consumer, is this business about not locking doors. We never locked our doors. I'm sorry, I call bullshit on this. I do. I research so many historical cases for some for some live speaking events that I do, and I'm constantly reading about like, oh well, they knew it was an intruder because the doors were all locked from the outside. I'm like, people have always locked their doors. That one always drives me crazy.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say about the description of every victim being exactly the same. Lighting
Yeah, she
up a
lit
room.
up a room. Yeah,
Lighting up a room.
that one's up there. That's your number one. That's probably my number two.
Well, yeah, because I mean, like, I think it's a little tacky, but in like the tacky corner of my content creation, I want to make one where they were like, you know, Sandy was great. She was grumpy, but she was like a funny kind of grumpy, and you know, and her cooking was awful. Like nobody liked her cook, and just saying
All
a
her
bunch
plants
of
died. Yeah.
yeah, just
she
a bunch
she
of
always she had that sign up that said please leave by 9. She was not
Yeah.
the life of the party, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. One time she told me I didn't have to go home, but I couldn't stay at her
Stay
house.
here. Yeah.
It was a little bit too much.
Has that ever
Yeah.
happened to you guys? By the way, has that ever happened? I've had that happen to me once.
What? Somebody asked you to leave a party?
Well, yeah, the husband was like, "Well, y'all don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." And we're like, "Oh, okay, sorry, time to get."
No.
Yes.
Oh, that's almost never me. I am 100% like off the boat Irish, and so the Irish goodbye is like a very real thing for me. I'm just like, I'm
Do
out.
you know that the Irish goodbye is actually a sign of compassion and like and respect?
I
Because
can see that. I can see that. Yeah.
I read this article because I love Irish goodbye because I get anxiety like saying goodbye to everyone. And I read that people who Irish goodbye don't center themselves in like the host's night.
Well, and the host is usually like Rabia, at your daughter's engagement party, I felt like this poor woman has enough to deal with right now. I'm going to pop over, give her a kiss, and I'm going to leave. She doesn't need to worry about
I have no
me right
recollection
now.
of you even leaving.
See, exactly. That's exactly how it should be.
Yeah.
I love an Irish goodbye. I love it.
All right. So my question is, I know you like to cook, Sarah, right? You cook. You do cook.
I
and
do.
You like to
I
cook.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
Oh, is that right, Ellen?
Oh, we all need to rent a house and cook for each other. That'd be fun.
Oh gosh. Oh, I know Ellen's totally making that up.
Oh,
Ellen cooks charcuterie boards. She cooks cheese and crackers.
There's
All
nothing
right.
wrong with a good board. I had a whole board party. You were there, Rabia.
Thank you, Sarah.
Listen. I'm having a party in my house in a couple of days with 100 people, and Ellen's like, "How much cheese and crackers you got to buy for 100 people?" I'm like,
That's what I said.
"None. I am roasting entire legs of lamb." Okay.
Y'all, she read me for filth over voice memo. I'm gonna start putting your voice memos up behind our Patreon wall so people can hear.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. All right, no. If you could cook a meal with one person in all of history, all of the world, cook a meal, not just cook a meal, who would it be?
Oh my gosh.
And
so
what meal?
not specifically a chef, but like
doesn't have
just
to be.
any one person.
right. Yeah.
I got to go Jane Austen.
Oh, interesting.
And I think I would want to cook her something that she didn't have to eat all the time. So I would not want to have a bunch of like overcooked potatoes and meat. I would want.
Are you making her pho? Are you making her pho, Sarah?
Oh no, I only get pho from my very specific one. I'm going to shout out Pho 75 on Washington Ave in Philadelphia. No, I would want to do something. I would want to do something really special. I don't know what, but something very exotic, maybe pho. I don't know. Something that she would not have gotten, because the thing with Jane Austen, she was this incredible mind, this incredible young woman. She died fairly young. She lived this incredible life through her books, and her characters lived these incredible lives. She mostly was just sort of like stuck mostly in one place. She was single, and I would love to not only be able to talk to her, but offer her some experiences of the world. Because, when you read Sense and Sensibility, and the way the youngest sister is obsessed with the maps, and she's going to go here and she's going to go there and stuff, I feel like that's a little bit of Jane, and I would like to give her that gift, because she's given us so much.
I love that answer.
I do too.
I'd make her kebabs. Meatballs.
Dude, she'd probably love a kebab. I mean, she's British, and it's all kebabs now. So
yeah,
she'd would be time traveling. So,
all right. Well, I mean, so the third question, Ellyn, go for it.
The third question is going to be kind of obvious for our listeners, but the third question,
but maybe not.
How does true crime fit into your life?
Needless to say, I've thought about this a lot since since you guys asked me to come on. I've been like, okay, don't F this up. The thing is, it has never not been a feature of my life. And I realized that a year or two ago, I saw something on like Twitter, and it said, what's the first like major news event that you remember happening, that you as a child were like hyper aware of this news event? And for me, I have two really, really strong memories. I was 5 years old for both of them. I'm sure Google can tell us which one happened first, but they happened in really close succession. And the first was the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan. I was living in Canada at the time, but I remember it being all over the news, and I remember being really like blown away by it. And then the second was the disappearance and then the ultimate recovery of Adam Walsh. And I remember he's the same age I am. This could be a kid at my school. And it is sort of never left the realm of fascinating for me ever since. Like, I have consumed what is now kind of referred to as true crime voraciously since I was a kid.
Adam Walsh. Mm-hmm. I mean, what was his dad's name? The
John Walsh.
John Walsh. I still see that was just so tragic. But he did something. He did something so
extraordinary.
We have
extraordinary
Nick Mac. Not just America's Most Wanted. We have Nick Mac because of John Walsh, and Nick, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Oh, I didn't know that
grew out of the Adam Walsh case, and that's, I mean, it's an incredible organization that just does untold heroics.
Yeah,
I'm always sending Sarah memes of I relax by watching the murder. I mean, that is Sarah. And Sarah will drive from Philadelphia to come park on my couch, and we will just, in our PJs, watch true crime together. And then she'll go home the next day.
Yep. We do slumber parties.
I have moved a lot in my life, and one of the toughest things about moving, and there's a lot of tough things, is having to find new doctors all over again for my entire family. New pediatricians, new OBGYNs, new internalists, new ENTs, you name it. It's so frustrating because you don't know where to start. So then you ask people, and then you get some recommendations, and then you call their offices, and that takes forever. And guess what? They don't take your insurance, or they're not taking new visitors, or they can't see you for 6 months. Anyhow, you can dispense with all of that. And I did too when I discovered ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app where you can find amazing doctors and book your appointments online. We're talking about booking appointments with thousands of top-rated and patient-reviewed doctors and specialists. And you can filter specially for ones who take your insurance, are located near you, and treat almost any condition that you're searching for. These doctors all have verified reviews from actual real patients, not bots. And get this, the average wait time to see a doctor booked on ZocDoc is between just 24 and 48 hours. It's amazing. You can even score same-day appointments. Once you find the doctor you want, you can book them immediately with just a few app taps. No more waiting on hold with a receptionist. I know I'm never going to do that again. I've been using ZocDoc for a couple of years now, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future. I only use ZocDoc now to book all my medical appointments for myself and my family, and you should too. Go to ZocDoc.com/solvethecase and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/solvethecase. ZocDoc.com/solvethecase.
I have to tell you, Rabia, Lumi is back, and every time I use it, I love the products more and more.
Yeah, it's the only deodorant I will travel with because, first of all, I can travel with it. It's not an aerosol, and you can use it like everywhere on your body.
And it was started by an OBGYN, a woman by the name of Dr. Shannon Klingman, because she met all these women that were concerned with odor down below the belt. And so they did all of this clinical testing. And turns out, ladies, it's not the vagina to blame. It's the bacteria on the skin. That's how she created Lumi, a skin-safe, aluminum-free deodorant that actually works, and it works everywhere.
I mean, I can't believe we got a man on the moon, decades ago. It took this long to figure out you need deodorant in more than just your armpits. I mean,
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Klingman.
What about your underboobs, your thigh folds, your belly button, your butt crack, your vulva, your feet? You can put this stuff anywhere, and it smells delicious. Try the toasted
Thanks for the visuals,
coconut.
Ellen. Thanks for the visuals. Yeah. It's aluminum-free, baking soda-free, and paraben-free, and it's pH balanced, so yeah, you can use it down below.
And it blocks the odor all day and controls it for up to 72 hours.
Lumi Starter Pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, a cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and it's free shipping.
I love the deodorant wipes. As a special offer for our listeners, new customers get $5 off a Lumi Starter Pack with code SOLVETHECASE at LumiDeodorant.com.
That equates to over 40% off your starter pack when you visit LumiDeodorant.com and use the code SOLVETHECASE.
You will love it, I promise.
Sarah, why don't you tell our Solve the Case listeners what case you chose?
The case that I chose is the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia murder.
Yep. I've just always heard of it. I've heard the Black Dahlia. I mean, I just never knew what it was about. And at what point did you kind of discover this case, Sarah? And how long have you, this been, on your radar?
I mean, it's been on my radar as long as I can remember. I went into pretty quickly when I decided to go into. I mean, the reason I decided to go into law enforcement, it was sort of backwards, was I wanted to go into work around sexual homicide, serial killers, stuff like that. I didn't really know what the context was for that. I didn't really know what that looked like in the mid-90s when I first started thinking this is the work I want to do. But I was devouring a lot of content at that time. And so I've been aware of the case. But in 2000... Lord, where are we at? 2019, early 2019, when I first took on the murder of Renee Bergeron in Mobile, Alabama, which is the subject of Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom, the very first time I laid eyes on the description and then the crime scene photos, my initial thought was, this almost looks like a Dahlia copycat. There are so many similarities. And so, I became even a little more interested with it then. And then, like I said, I do these sort of speaking events around the country, and people will always ask me, what's the true crime case that you're obsessed with? And I never really had an answer. And then for one of my events, I was going to discuss this case. Fully obsessed ever since. Once I started really reading up on it, I'm down that rabbit hole with everybody else.
Well, this is really a rabbit hole because I feel like in so many cases that we've covered, you can go pretty broad and you can talk about so many different things. But you could just not stop with this, with the amount of false confessions and suspects. I mean, they were anybody with a penis with a 20-mile radius was a suspect.
And some without. There was a female who confessed to it. Yeah, we'll get into all that, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I can see when you say rabbit hole, this is probably one of the rabbitiest of all the holes. That is a technical term. You guys
That
can
is
look it up
a
later.
technical term. I know. I sent
Bringing
Rabia
up all kinds of imagery for me, but
all kinds of imagery. I sent Rabia the 900-page FBI files. I was like, here you go, have fun.
yeah. I didn't get through all of them. Let's just put it
No,
like that.
no.
But
Look, I haven't been through all of them, so it's okay.
I think I went through the stuff that matters enough for this conversation. So, Ellyn, should we tell our listeners all about it? Give them the crash course?
We'll give you our crash course, and then we have so much to talk about.
All right, let's do this. I am from the generation that grew up with the nightly news. No round-the-clock cable news in my childhood. And I always remember being kind of, impressed at the risk of sounding weird with the people whose deaths were reported every night. I thought they must be really important people to have the news report that they died. And I wondered if I'd ever be that important. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized, dear God, most of those stories are reported because the person died in a terrible way, in an accident, or as the victim of violent crime. Since that realization, I've always said a silent prayer that when it's time for me and my loved ones to go, it doesn't merit a news story.
Unfortunately, the more horrific the circumstances of someone's demise, the more notorious the story becomes, and the longer it lingers in the public imagination. And when there's a mystery at the heart of the story, it adds even more intrigue, which is why today's case is one of the most infamous true crime stories of the past century, the Black Dahlia murder. The real name of the woman who became known worldwide as the Black Dahlia was Elizabeth Short. Her grisly murder in 1947 remains one of the most obsessed over cases of all time. Elizabeth Short was a native of Hyde Park, Massachusetts, who moved to Los Angeles in 1942 to reunite with her estranged father, a man that had abandoned Elizabeth and her mother and siblings when she was only 6 years old. He had so thoroughly disappeared, in fact, that the family and authorities thought he must have committed suicide after being financially ruined in the stock market crash of 1929. It wasn't until years later that Elizabeth's mother received a letter from him apologizing for leaving the family and admitting that he had just been fined the entire time and that he was living in Vallejo, California. A few months later, in January of 1943, Elizabeth moved to Vallejo to be with her father, but they didn't last long together. Within months, he had kicked her out and she found herself struggling on her own.
Records show that Elizabeth then got a job at Camp Cook in Lompoc, California, and was living with a U.S. Air Force sergeant. According to what she told friends, the sergeant was abusive, and months later she moved out again. She bounced around a bit, going back home to Massachusetts and then to Florida, where she fell in love with a major who was killed in combat a week before the end of World War II. She returned to LA in July of 1946 in the hopes of being discovered and acting. Elizabeth had good reason to believe she could. She certainly had the looks that were all the vogue at the time. She had lily-white skin and raven black hair and had begun dressing in all black, earning her the nickname Black Dahlia from her friends. The moniker was also inspired by the fact that one of Elizabeth's favorite movies was the 1946 noir murder mystery film, The Blue Dahlia. Little did Elizabeth know that she would soon herself become the center of a real-life murder mystery. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a woman was taking a walk with her child on a road which ran past the LA Leimert Park neighborhood on one side and a vacant lot on the other. It was close to 11 a.m. when she came across a grisly scene. Laying right next to the sidewalk was a nude female body that had been neatly bisected in two precise pieces. The two sections of the body lay a couple of feet apart, but were placed misaligned, to make it clear to anyone looking that the body was not in one piece. The arms were raised above her head at a 90-degree angle, and the victim's legs were splayed wide open. It was clear that the killer, or whoever left her there, had not just dumped the body. They had in fact carefully positioned it and left it out in plain view in order to be discovered. Eerily, though, there was a mannequin-like appearance to the body because of the lack of blood. There was no blood anywhere. Not on the body and not on the area around it.
The authorities arrived pretty quickly, within 10 minutes, but someone else arrived even sooner. Reporters. By the time the police got there, reporters were already trampling all over the crime scene and taking dozens of pictures of the body. There are even pictures of the photographers taking pictures, literally right on top of her. These pictures aren't hard to find online, but buyer beware, they're graphic and gruesome. The photos show the brutality of the mutilation the victim endured. Chunks of flesh from her breasts, right thigh were carved out, long gashes extended the sides of her mouth into a macabre smile, and her head was full of bruising and gashes. The eventual autopsy report would reveal that she had been exsanguinated, drained of blood, and thoroughly washed. Her cause of death was a combination of hemorrhaging and shock due to deep knife lacerations of the face and repeated blows by a heavy metal object to the face and head, and the medical examiner believed she had been dead less than 24 hours before she was found. From the minute reporters got to the crime scene before the police, the investigation was hampered. The Examiner, a large LA newspaper, seemed to be more plugged into the investigation than the authorities themselves. In fact, the police weren't able to identify the victim until the Examiner, which somehow got a hold of the victim's fingerprints, sent them to the FBI and got a match to Elizabeth Short. Once she was identified, the media very quickly dubbed the crime the Black Dahlia murder. The media was in deep on this case, covering it incessantly on the front page every day for months. Every step of the way, the Examiner and the other news outlets had detailed information about what the investigators were up to, the suspects that emerged and dismissed, the many confessing Sams that came over, and yes, they reported all of them in real time. The Examiner was in so deep that FBI memos show that the editor of the paper, who was getting information from the mayor, was in touch with the Bureau to express his concern about local police incompetence. Not only that, it wasn't local authorities or the mayor that requested the FBI step in to help with the investigation. It was the Examiner editor who did so.
As egregious as the media's involvement was, the editor's concern may have been merited. Investigators were able to pinpoint and corroborate that Elizabeth was last seen alive on January 9th, 6 days before her body was found, when her boyfriend dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel. But where she disappeared to after that, they had no clue. While hundreds of officers were involved in the investigation, over 2,700 reports were taken, over 300 named suspects, and dozens of false confessors wasted law enforcement's time and resources, it all ultimately amounted to nothing. 2 years later, in 1949, an almost coerced confession by a suspect who then sued the city prompted a grand jury investigation. The grand jury convened with the purpose of holding the LAPD responsible for failing to solve Elizabeth Short's murder and the murders and disappearances of numerous other women in the 1940s, but it too ultimately amounted to nothing. No indictment, no accountability. And now, all these decades later, the Black Dahlia murder, the murder of Elizabeth Short, remains one of the most infamous cold cases in contemporary American history. So, let's talk about it.
Okay.
Oh boy.
I always feel like I don't breathe during the crash course.
Yeah.
Because then I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Reading the script is it's a little harder. Okay. So I want to start off by talking to you, Sarah, about, like you said, that when you started looking at this, like that's when you became obsessed. But why is this such a long, why does it have like such a long memory in the American imagination? Why are people obsessed with it?
I think part of it is the extent of the brutality. The simple fact is, no matter how much we want to say that the voyeurism, true crime, is problematic, there are elements of it that roll into all media consumption of crime, and the worse the case, the more shocking the case, the bigger the impact it has on the public, right? So when we see a victim treated the way Elizabeth was treated, her body destroyed the way it was, it really, really hits on our own, like our instinctual level, base level fears. And so we become obsessed because it's this feeling of like, could this happen to me? Was she like me? Could this, and I think that is a huge part of it, the brutality of the case in particular. I think part of it too, Rabia and have talked about this a lot when we debate the question, because we're both sort of publicly asked a lot, like, why are people fascinated with true crime, right? And so she and I have talked about this a lot. And one of the answers that Rabia gives that I think is really salient here is that it is such a crazy mystery that you can spend hours and hours and hours and never begin to scratch the surface. And the fact is, smart people like mysteries. We like to dig, we like to explore, we like to see if we can solve the question that hasn't been solved. I mean, when we look at Zodiac, right? Who was it that first theoretically broke the cipher? It was a husband and wife at their kitchen table who liked to do puzzles for fun. So, like, we all sort of think, maybe I'll be the one to solve this. And I think that because this case has so many avenues and so many questions, that it really lends itself to that obsession factor.
I mean, but there. I think, but from the jump, I think the obsession might have been. There obviously the brutality is like breathtaking in this case. I mean, like rarely do you see like this level of just like what was done to Elizabeth. But from the jump, I also think there was there was a lot of the rumors around who she was, a lot of judgment around who she might have been that also maybe fueled it. People love like a sex crime type of, you know what I mean? Like I feel like that might have been it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the articles that you pulled, was talking about the similarities, and I don't want to spoil anything, but the similarities between this and a series of murders in San Diego a few years earlier. And the fact is, even though we weren't calling it serial killers and Ted Bundy was, a glimmer in somebody's eye or whatever, people have always been obsessed with what we now recognize as serial killers, this particular breed of monster. And so I think it's clear to anybody looking at this, like, this probably wasn't a one-off. And I think that, like you said, it's that it's that fascination with this particular type.
Yeah, I mean, this case really does encapsulate so many things in terms of the parts of true crime that we're obsessed with. We're obsessed with beauty, and she was gorgeous. That was, and of course her autopsy said all these like awful things about her and her teeth, and it was a lot of things and then the media, that's a whole other layer of the onion. And then really I would want to say gruesome. That doesn't even seem like an enough of a word to the way that she was left in terms of the way her body was,
posed. She was posed.
Yeah,
she was
she was
presented.
posed, and the blood being gone, and I mean, it seems like a movie. Really,
I was gonna
it
say,
seems
yeah,
like a
yeah.
horror movie and something. Well, that would never happen. It seems like something that would never happen.
So that, I think, and I totally, like Rabia, you said something really important, and I completely failed to get all the way back around to it, and that is like the rumors that people had said about her. And part of the reason that people will come up with these rumors is because they want to say, well, it couldn't happen to me. And that is part of that obsession too. It's like, well, I'm not like that, I'm not this, or I'm not that, I'm not promiscuous, I'm not a sex worker. I'm not saying that that she, but like that is the way that we distance ourselves when we see those, because we want to reassure ourselves that it couldn't happen to us, that it's so horrific, but it couldn't happen to us. And that is a lot of what fuels that sort of rumor mill. I mean, in addition to just rampant misogyny that we generally seem to hate women, and, it's a tale as old as time.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean it's the old, well, I mean you do this kind of stuff and you're inviting that kind of, I mean, you know what I mean, like it's risky behavior. But the thing about those rumors, and I remember when you first kind of briefed me on the case, you're like, all these rumors surrounding her, like literally every single one was false. Like every single one was false, and it's shocking. But that takes me to something I want to talk about that's really important, I think, in a case like this, because I have listened to you talk about this stuff, but also there's a lot of misconceptions around this entire kind of field of investigative work, and that's victimology. And I know some people hear that word and they think victim blaming, right? So, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit of victimology, and then I want you to walk us through the victimology of Elizabeth Short.
Okay, so I actually have sort of a rote answer. I'm going to read it, and Josh, you can trim this down as you need. So victimology, in its simplest terms, like when we speak of it academically, is the study of crime from the perspective of the victim's role in the event. And again, that is not to say their responsibility, but their role, just who they were in the equation, right? And when we speak of it, go ahead.
For the dumb people in the room, and I'm just raising my hand, the role in the event meaning like she went to that bar.
Well, or just who was she to the killer? Right?
Got it.
What is her role? Because really what we need to remember when we're talking about any homicide is that the action is the choice of the killer, not the choice of the victim, of course. Of course, yeah. And so when we talk about the victimology, it's about understanding who that person was, and then that can help you work backwards to understanding why that killer chose that person. Yeah. And so it is the exact opposite of what people tend to think. Like they hear the word and they think this is terrible. You're talking about blaming the victim. And it's not just about what job did they do or who were they friends with or God forbid what were they wearing.
Are those things also victimology though? Like the people
they can be a part of it, yeah, but really what you need to know is who was this person? Who like what kind of things was she into? What kind of what sort of trust level did she have with people that she met for the first time, right? Stuff like this will help you understand how the killer targeted them, what their MO was, how that fed their signature, all of these things. And you can only get there by really, really, really getting to know the victim. And that means getting to know the people around them because they're not there to speak for you. So it does mean stuff like reading diaries if you can get them, but it means talk to their roommates, talk to their friends. Don't ask them, don't just talk to them and say, what time did she come home the night before? Talk to them like, what movies did she like to go see? What kind of, what was her favorite food? And all that stuff.
Did she lock her door at night?
Did she lock her door at night? Did she, in fact, light up a room? Right. You have to get to really know the victim. And then you can, from there, work backwards to get to understand who targets that victim. And why that victim was targeted. And sometimes it's deeply personal. The two of them knew each other. And the only way you're going to find that out, if you have somebody, say they were a sex worker, right? Okay. But if you go at it from the aspect of, okay, I'm going to start with sex worker and go from there, you're going to look at drug dealers, you're going to look at pimps, you're going to look at this and that and everything. Okay, but sex workers have families and friends too. And sex workers have lives outside their jobs like all the rest of us.
They've got boyfriends and partners.
They've got boyfriends and partners, and like, who else were they interacting with? And if you don't bother to talk to the people who really knew them, you're never going to know that. And you're going to overlook, quite frankly, statistically, the people most likely to kill someone.
Well, bringing it back to this case, though, that again was such an issue because she didn't have any family. She didn't have any like besties. She didn't have any roommates. She didn't have people that even noticed she was gone for 6 days or 7. She hadn't been seen for 6 days.
Yeah.
Not to say she was missing, but...
Right. I would actually... So there is an element of that is true, right? So she had moved around. She was basically couch surfing is the way we would think of it now.
Which is so
for
funny
several months.
That's very common.
That's very common
around performers.
In your early 20s, are you kidding me? Like, who hasn't done that? But she did have people in her life, and she had a good friend who specifically said to the police, you must look at this one man. And they wrote him off very quickly. Like, they were afraid for her from this one man, and they barely looked at him. She did have, her mother, when her mother came out to California to identify her body, she said, she wrote to me every couple of days when she was traveling. Like, she was very close with her family. In a lot of aspects, she had this sister who lived in California who said she hadn't seen her in a couple of years. Right. But don't we all? We all have family that we're closer to and family that that we're not as close with, and they just didn't really try.
Yeah, and also it's just different time. You can't just text someone and
if somebody calls you from a payphone and you're not home, you miss that call.
That's it.
It's just a total different time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know this show is called Rabia and Ellyn Solve the Case, but in this episode, Sarah's going to solve the case because she's going to walk us through what she does as an investigator, which brings me back to what does victimology in Elizabeth Short's case look like through your eyes, through your analysis, and is that part of like your presentation too that you do, or no?
Oh
When
yeah,
you
absolutely.
present-
It's a huge
Okay.
part of my presentation when I talk about this case. Yeah, so Elizabeth Short was obviously, like we said, she's 22. Like everybody stop for a second and think about how you were
baby.
behaving, how you were acting at 22. Exactly. She had been in and out of love. She was like crazy about the pilot who was killed in India. She was crazy about another military guy. She definitely seemed to have like military guy type, which was really common. A man in uniform right around World War II. She had gone back and forth between California and just outside Boston, like Rabia said. But she had also struggled with breathing issues, with asthma, and with like pretty severe respiratory issues. So she tended to favor a warmer climate because that's what doctors at the time said that you needed. I don't know how much that really helps, but that's what she was always told. And that was part of she lived in Florida for a while, and that was part of the reason that she had moved out to California. Now, we know victimology in terms of like her dad describing her is that he brought her out there under the agreement that she would cook and clean for him. Right. And after 3 weeks, he was like, she didn't cook and she didn't clean. Okay, so you wanted a housemaid, not a daughter. She rebelled against that, and so you guys parted ways. Again, all of this looks perfectly normal, but in the lens of that time, they're like, oh, she was a wild girl who's
won't cook and
dating
clean.
and this and that. She won't cook and clean. But you can see in this constant, like the mother of the pilot who was killed, who she was engaged to, had expressed like some reservations about it. She almost seemed like, wow, this happened really fast. This girl is a little gaga for him. She's definitely in love with him, but like, my God, should these crazy kids get married? And I think we can see from that you can imagine we all had friends like that at 22 who were just
I was that friend.
I was that friend.
I got married then.
Yeah, and like we were just, you were desperate to. She did want to get married. She did because that was the expectation of the time. Yeah. And so she was bouncing around. Her mom said, I never even knew she had money problems, which was clear that she did with all this couch surfing. She would like borrow money from people and stuff. And that also shows a kind of resilience, a kind of like, no, I got my shit together. I don't need to ask my mom for money, right? And there's a sort of naivete in that. And I think that that's the biggest thing we see in her. And that may have been, the thing that made her a target for whoever chose her, is just this sort of like, I'm very mature and confident, and in fact, she's really quite young at the heart of it all.
She really is, and it's the tale as old as time. Moving to Hollywood to be an actress. For all intents and purposes, she never acted. No. Which, please, I know it's so hard. But I mean, it's that thing, that line from Pretty Woman, welcome to Hollywood. What's your dream? Everybody's got a dream. Everybody comes there with their, all of these great expectations, and then reality hits you. How am I going to pay rent? She was staying in that sort of like girls' hostel nightly thing every once in a while.
Yeah.
But, a bulk of her time was spent kind of like, they made it seem really tacky, and they made it seem really low-lifey. And I was like, the amount of times that all of our friends growing up, especially performers, when you're in and out of town waiting for a gig, waiting for a check, it's really, really not. It really is very common. And they made her sound kind of like a swindler in that sense. Like she was just trying to make it in a town.
And make it on her
Hollywood.
own.
Yeah.
She was trying to do it with a father who was, quite frankly, a giant piece of shit for what he did to that family, with a mother who she clearly didn't want to share her burdens with. I mean, her mom still had young kids at home, and she kind of thought she could do it. And I get that. And maybe maybe there was a level of manipulation, right? That's, like, oh, I'm so pretty and like I kind of need a place to stay. Like, okay, that doesn't make a whole person, right?
Yeah.
Like that is just like that's
Well,
survival mode.
it seems like, I mean, like the statements that were taken from friends, and she had a lot. She had like it seemed like
Yep.
a pretty like strong circle of friends.
Yep.
They all described her as somebody who's like just really likable and
Yep.
easygoing, and I don't know if they'd even have to be manipulative to be like, can I crash at your place type of thing. She was waitressing. Like, she had only been back in LA for 6 months before she was killed. It's not like she had
Yeah.
years to like pursue this dream. She literally was just kind of getting her bearings. Her friends or a friend did describe her as kind of never having rent and always being broke. And I wonder, I mean, like, and she was seen in the company of soldiers a lot, having a drink with them, partying with them. And I think, like you said, that was kind of the thing that was happening then. Also, I read about like this entire campaign, a government campaign that would like encourage this and say, these soldiers like need a warm meal and need company, and so like talk to them and share, go out with them, and like there was a lot of encouragement for young women.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
like,
and a young, very pretty girl. I mean, you really had no choice but to get married at that
Yeah.
time if you wanted to survive. And so, what is a drop dead gorgeous woman going to do but flirt with soldiers who are just back from the war? Like, yes, that makes a lot of sense if you are programmed to believe I have to get a husband. It's the only way to be secure.
There's no evidence though that she ever asked any of those men to pay for her rent or to put her
No,
up.
not
You know
her
what I mean?
rent. There was, I think there was one guy who said, "Oh, I loaned her $5 a couple times." Like,
Yeah.
no, you're absolutely right. She didn't.
Yeah.
She did not even seem to stay with most of them. She seemed to stay with either friends of friends, or there was the woman in San Diego she stayed with for about a month. Like, I guess, how awful can she be if she's a guest for a month someplace? I don't think I would
Yeah.
do that to anybody.
Yeah, all the rumors about how many men she had been with, someone was like, she could be seen with 5 men in a week. I was like, go off, girl, live your life.
Yeah.
You're not married, you're not tied down, you don't have kids. And so that whole thing about the media, and I think there's a lot of things that is going to come back to the media or surrounding this case, just like the perpetuation of rumors and the way that they made her sound and how misogynistic their reporting was. But they love to really paint her as this. I mean, they actually wrote like whore in
and a harlot.
the paper.
Yeah. Well, and I want to point out too, you were talking about the Examiner, and the Examiner was the main paper. It was like the flagship paper of William Randolph Hearst. And I can't remember if it was this case or another like big LA case. It may have been a different one, but Hearst in some case in LA around this time specifically said to his reporters, I don't give a shit if you got to make stuff up. Sell papers. And as soon as it would start to die, that it would turn back up in the thing. And so whether it was this case or not, obviously Hearst, that was part of the business model.
Yeah.
What I want to do next is actually, because I mean, like Sarah, I know how she works as an investigator in terms of like what are the elements of like a crime she looks at, and so what I want her to do is walk us now through the crime scene and what that says to her. So a couple of things that really struck me was the fact that, I mean, whoever killed her and left her body there, they were not trying to hide anything. I mean, there was a vacant lot. She could have been carried well into the vacant. So and she wasn't just dumped and ran. This person took their time, put her right next to the sidewalk, literally like inches from the sidewalk. And I'm like, and the crime scene was otherwise almost spotless. There was apparently a tire track that was found close to her body, maybe a bloody smear on the tire track, but like even the lack of blood to me is astonishing. And so I want you to talk about that, and also talk about like, I mean, isn't that kind of what you're dealing with the case at the heart of your podcast?
Yes. So the word that comes to mind, it's not, sometimes when we talk about these types of sadistic sexual homicides, we talk about posing, right? Like the ritual involved and the sort of posing. This, to me, this case goes beyond posing and goes to full-on presentation. This was, to this person, this was a presentation. Like you said, one of the things that jumped out at me, if you were going to pull a body out, a vacant lot kind of makes some sense if you're going to dump a body and run. But where the tire tracks were and where the blood droplets were and stuff were actually, a little ways down from where the body was actually located, which means whoever did that took the additional risk, right? Rather than just like pulling up, dumping her out the side
Right
of the
there.
car where you're obscured by the door and stuff and then taking off. They walked and carried and took the time to lay her out, the way her arms were posed, the way her body was, was angled, the way her legs were presented. That was so specific and so meant. I would go so far as to say it may be meant for a specific person, or at least in the killer's mind, it's meant for a specific person, whether or not that person exists.
What do you even mean by that? Like, what do you?
Like a person to see it, like someone to see it.
Oh yeah, I mean, like beyond wanting just somebody to see it, right? It seems to me that when a killer is doing that, they have something in their mind. This is a story that they want to tell. And whether it is a story they want to tell to the world or a story that they want to tell to like, an imaginary person or a person they are obsessed with and have been stalking. Or, when we look at Golden State Killer or even Ted Bundy, we hear these stories about like the girlfriend they never got over, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you see that as like a driving factor where it's like everything is in some way sort of show with this in mind. And like one of the things that struck me, I was like, did they bother to see if anybody in the homes directly in the line of sight of where she was found knew her or knew anybody who behaved strangely? Like those people, but it doesn't seem like they even canvassed the neighborhood, because they said they spent weeks trying to find the woman who had called in the body.
I couldn't believe that. I
couldn't find this woman. She lived a half a block away. So you clearly didn't knock and talk. You did not canvass the neighborhood. So they have no way of knowing, like, was there some connection to a home like directly across the street or nearby or something like that. I think when you see a scene, Dr. Burgess talks about this a lot, right? The level of ritual and the level.
Well, can you tell folks who Dr. Burgess is?
So Dr. Ann Burgess is, for people who saw Mindhunter, the character Dr. Wendy Carr is based on her. So while some great FBI agents went around and conducted interviews with serial killers, Dr. Burgess is the one who created the science behind it. She is the one who developed the questionnaires. She is the one who interpreted the questionnaires. She really is the true the brilliance behind the idea of criminal profiling or criminal psychology as we understand it with serial predators. And so one of the things that Dr. Burgess talks about a lot is how long did they spend with the body after the death? To some degree leading up to it, right? Like how sadistic they are will sometimes be reflected in how long they spent sort of torturing this person, whether it's physical torture or just the emotional torture of knowing that you're probably going to end up dead. And we know in her case that she had ligature marks on her wrists and her ankles and had been strangled. And so we know there was some element of she was held for at least a little while. We really have no way of knowing if she was held that whole time, because like you said, she would kind of come and go, and it's not like we have texting. And so, 6 or 7 days is really not that long for nobody to necessarily have seen her. Or it's also possible she was held that entire time by somebody from when she was last seen at the Biltmore. But so then after the murder is committed, how long do they spend with the body afterwards? And in this case, they obviously spent significant time, not just with the mutilation, but with the cleaning, the exsanguination, the picking a place to bring it, because there's no place is an accident. I mean, if they put her in a dumpster, that's just get rid of the body. If you chose that place, he chose that place for a reason.
Just the dramatic nature of the pose and how the two parts of her body were in different places. I mean, it really is so unbelievable.
Yeah.
all her mutilation, other than like the gashing on the face and maybe even the cut, that was all post-mortem, right?
I believe so. That's my understanding, is
Yeah.
that they felt that the mutilation to the face happened pre or perimortem, that was like a secondary cause of death, that she had so much blood loss from the facial wounds. But it's my understanding that the cuts in the womb area and all of that stuff,
And from her thigh, there's like a
and the
chunk out of her thigh.
right, and the cuts to the breast and stuff, that's done. Somebody took it long time and care and precision, in their own mind with that.
Yeah, I read a lot of conflicting things on the cuts on her face. Is that kind of still sort of a guess? Is that still like an estimation about when that happened? Because the reason I ask is because somebody had said that pain and shock of an injury like that could actually kill someone, give them a heart attack. Not that she died of a heart attack, but I'm just saying that amount of intense pain. So was that ever decided, or is that still up for debate?
I think I have always understood it that was a secondary cause, that it was like, that they said that the
blunt force trauma.
blows to the blunt force trauma to particularly the front of her head was the primary cause, and then the blood loss from the lacerations. And yeah, I'm not a forensics person, I'm not a criminalist, so I can't talk about it in super detail, but I do know that like the amount of blood that is produced when a wound is given, is indicative of whether they were alive, how long they had been dead. You know what I mean? Like
whether they're
'cause
not
the heart's
gonna
still
bleed.
pumping. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Another word I was trying to remember. I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong, and I'm going to get 700 DMs. Ecchymosis.
Never even heard of it.
ECCHY-mosis, which is basically that bluish discoloration that I was trying to explain. And that is evidence that the internal bleeding was caused to live tissue. So that was what was, but maybe tissue still has oxygen, or it appears to be alive even if someone is recently
But the internal
deceased.
bleeding is probably what happened because of the blunt force trauma. The question is about the external bleeding, like how, because like the chunks of, there were parts of her that were carved off of her body, right? Like
know.
so, and it is hard to judge because that's not even the crime scene. Like the
Right.
police were never able to identify where she was actually killed, and she was definitely held for some amount of time because the ligature marks show that she had been like bound and stuff. I think one of the most gruesome, the whole thing, bisecting the body in half is it's unfathomable. But I thought about the the slashes on the sides of her mouth, extending into like this really terrifying like kind of grin. And I think I don't know, it's one of the scariest aspects of this. Like that just seems, like evil. Like evil in a way that I don't understand.
Evil, and it is so deeply personal. And that, when we use the term personal in criminology, it doesn't necessarily mean that the two people knew each other, right? It can, but it does mean that it was very specifically about this victim for the killer. And there was something about her that he was filled with tremendous rage, particularly about her femininity and her sexuality, because in addition to like her beautiful face being completely disfigured, she was also, her sexual organs were mutilated as well. Like this was a very specific target directed at whoever he saw her as in his world, in his life. She represented something, or he knew her. I mean, that's also possible, right? But she represented something to him that he was just fucking furious about, and like he was gonna show her.
There's something about mutilating and hurting someone's face. You remember Samantha Koenig? She was Israel Keyes' last victim in Alaska. And sorry for the graphic explanation, but he sent a picture of her with her. She was actually deceased and her eyelids. He sewed her eyelids open. There's something very, I guess, personal. Yeah, there's something so I am really at a loss for words today.
It's as masochist, or it's as sadistic as it gets.
Sadistic. It
It
is
is
sadistic. It's
as
like
sadistic as it gets, because it is
it's like murder plus one. It's like
Yeah.
also this thing that your loved ones might be able to say goodbye to, or that will be your memory. I'm taking that
It just
too.
seems like a lot
There's
of
some
hate. A lot of
It's a
hate.
lot of hate. And
Yeah.
now, so here's where, right, where we say, okay, now we have to flip the script and say, what does this say about the killer? And what this says about the killer, generally, when we see the need to punish someone's physical appearance, usually means they are deeply insecure about their own physical appearance. Deeply insecure. They hate the world for viewing them the way they think the world views them. Again, sometimes this shit is all in somebody's head, but it is, they believe they are perceived a certain way. This person is like the epitome of all of that. We kind of see it to some degree with, when we talk about incel murders, right? Like Elliot Rogers and stuff like that, where it's like, I don't think I can have these women, so I'm going to destroy them. And
that
that's
makes
like,
so much sense.
for this woman, he had to destroy what he felt insecure about in her.
Yeah.
So,
Or
I mean-
maybe it was someone she had rejected or something. That the fragility of the male ego. It's like a little crystal egg.
Yeah.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
I criminal profiling and this kind of, I mean, this is Sarah's, lane, not mine. But it feels like, I mean, here's one of the things that's shocking to me. I mean, there's so many things shocking. Every single aspect shocking is the incredible discipline with which this whole thing was done, right? This is not a messy, rage-filled crime. This is a very carefully executed crime, leaving no evidence, washing the body. They tested her for sperm, nothing there. She had clearly been sexually assaulted. I mean, that's, for sure. But like this guy,
It's meticulous.
it's
Yeah.
meticulous. And so I'm like, that can't be somebody like, she rejected me, I'm going to come for her. This is like somebody I'm like, who's got some practice or something. Like, how do you,
Right.
that can't be your first crime. Can that, Sarah?
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing. I would be very, very surprised to learn that this was somebody's first crime. Like, this is a very advanced scene. Everything about this. Now, we were also dealing with the Keystone Cops with the LAPD of 1947, and so maybe even a sloppy scene would not have been picked up. But it does seem like everything that we know about it was extremely well planned. It's extremely organized. Like when we talk about organized and disorganized killers, it doesn't mean that there wasn't to that person's mind, because we have to not think like we think, right? We have to think like, so if
Like she didn't smile at him or
she
something.
yeah, exactly. Or if she rejected him, that doesn't mean that she wouldn't have gone to this. It just means that, like, okay, there might have been a period of time through which he simmered on that rejection, and yes, this was like his 10th or whatever. The other thing that's possible is sometimes we see the inability for a serial rapist who has escalated to homicide, the inability to perform in quotes, because like rape obviously is not a performance, but that is where then we will see object rape and the stuff like the blade rape, and then the rejection of the face, like he's blaming it on her when, you know what I mean? So again, this is why, like, it can be a total stranger, but it's deeply personal.
Absolutely. I totally understand that. Yeah.
So there's one piece of evidence. I mean, there were like a couple of bags found, and I think like the question. I mean, like, okay, maybe her body was transported in those bags or not. But one of the pieces of evidence that I thought was really fascinating was there was these fibers that were found on her body, and they turned out to be like these palm tree fibers that are used in manufacturing like cheap brushes. Like brushes meaning, and I don't. From the FBI reports, I can't tell if they mean like a hairbrush or which I don't think, but I think they mean like paintbrush type of thing. Or what do you understand that, Sarah?
The thing that I read, I did get the impression hairbrush, and what that said to me was like, oh shit, this is a cop, right? Because like if he had sex with her and he knows enough to know they're going to look for fibers and hairs, because forensics has come a long way, but they did look for fibers and hairs back then. That they might, because they would do like hair type and stuff like that. That he might have thought to like comb out the pubic region. I mean, that's just one thing that jumps out. But if it's a paintbrush, yeah, maybe that's how he lured her in. Do you want to come model for me? How many, Rodney Alcala, how many serials do we know who said pose for me?
Yeah.
And,
So when I read it, I thought it was a brush from her like being cleaned because her body was so clean, like a body brush, because back then they weren't quite as soft as they are now, and they were made of like different like animal hairs or some like fibers or something, or even like burlap bags, like kind of to clean and to pumice. So that's what I thought it was, because her body was so
completely
clean. We know it was drained of blood, but there wasn't a spot on her or any semen on her. There was nothing. So I thought her body had literally been scrubbed.
That actually, I mean, that might be the simplest explanation, which, as Occam's razor tells us, is usually the truth.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I usually go the opposite of Occam's razor. I'm like, a hot air balloon came down. Go with me. And then a zombie came out. Not a real zombie, a fake zombie, like the ones at Disneyland. Okay, anyway.
Well, actually, I was going to say one more thing about what was done to Elizabeth, and that is that it wasn't that she was just killed and mutilated post-mortem, maybe, and then cut in half, but there are signs that she was tortured. For example, the medical examiner found that in her stomach, it seemed like there was fecal matter or fertilizer, something. I mean, there was definitely like something that didn't belong in her stomach was in her stomach, which seems to suggest she might have been like forced to eat that kind of stuff. I mean, like, so it seems like there was like this, like just the rage and hate filled like humiliation that
yeah,
that she was forced to endure first.
Yeah, and like the tic-tac-toe marks is the way the guy described it in the police report. There were like, they were not deep cuts. They would not, I mean, they would have hurt, but they would not have wounded. But there were like hash marks essentially on like parts of her where that, that feels like
what do you make
emotional
of
torture.
Yeah. What do you make of the fact that that chunk was cut out of her? I mean, we know her sexual organs were mutilated, but the chunk was cut out of her thigh. I mean, what I have read is that friend said that she had a tattoo on her upper right thigh, a tattoo of a red rose or something, and the body didn't have one on it. So the assumption is maybe the killer cut out that tattoo. Mm-hmm. And why do you think that they would do that?
Well, again, there's something about it that is personal and offensive to him, right? So again, it's part of that. If he is,
was this an era in which a woman can't get a tattoo?
Yeah, that's what I was like.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to have a tattoo until I got one in like whatever it was, 2011 or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, 1947, no, women were not supposed to have tattoos. That's more like whore behavior. And so yeah, there is something offensive about that to this guy. Again, everything about her, he is mad at her particular expressions of femininity. Whatever that is. It's all inadvertent on her part. She's just living her life. But whoever this person is, all of these things are offensive. I had seen differing reports about that tattoo, so that's why I've always been careful. But yeah, there was something there that he decided to carve out.
Yeah, I think it was all rooted in control and misogyny and taking away her beauty and her femininity in some sick, twisted.
We keep referring to this person in the singular. Do you think there's a world in which this could have been more than one person? Because when we get into the suspects, now we're getting to the suspects, there's a theory that it could have been more than one person.
I mean, when we look at, so that's called folie à deux when you're talking about like two killers who operate together. And they're the toolbox killers were the names of, two guys who operated in California in the early 80s. And there was a lot of really sadistic behavior between the two of them. Typically, you don't see it quite this prolonged and sadistic with multiple people because you really are kind of counting on somebody else being just as messed up as you are, and like in terms of being willing to go this far. But it does happen. I tend to think of it as one person, but we've definitely seen this level of sadism exhibited by multiples.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, this is Unsolved. Obviously, we're here because of that, and they basically treated everybody Elizabeth knew
as a suspect. Everybody had to be cleared. That included friends or people she had been seen with. I mean, they questioned a lot of people. And
Sarah's
then
like, nope, they didn't do enough.
Well, they cleared people that, in my opinion, they probably shouldn't have
Oh,
cleared.
yeah. Oh, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that, like, everybody was considered a suspect. They did not do their due diligence. We'll get to that, obviously, because the
Except
murder...
her dad. Her dad was never a suspect.
Where
Now,
was her dad?
He in LA, like a mile away. He supposedly has a pretty solid alibi, and I am inclined to think it's probably a good alibi, but I don't know. Like, there's a lot about this, you know.
Well, hundreds of people were considered, like over 60 people confessed, like you said before, men and women. But there is like, you could make several lists. There's several lists online. There's the top 24 suspects. There's the top 20. There's the top 10. Rabia, do you have like a top? Should we do 5? Or, I mean, it can go on.
I mean, we're going to
be
talk
like a
about
17-parter.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to talk about like the some of the most, I think, salient ones. But the father thing to me is like, again, I keep going back to like the meticulousness, is that a word? With how this was done. Like, it just doesn't seem like a one-off to me. I'm like, this guy's a pro.
Oh, I
This
completely
guy's a pro.
agree, but
I'm
those
like, and
two
unless
things
her
aren't mutually exclusive. Her dad had like vanished for 10 years.
So I mean, I was gonna say, unless her dad is a serial killer, like I
Right,
feel
that's
like which that's a theory that I actually have not read online. But yeah,
no, I have not either.
I
'Cause
will
he
say
does
this.
have an alibi, but
I was impressed as somebody who deals in a realm where people who falsely confess get wrongly convicted all the time, with the fact that the police were able to be like, no, this person's crazy. They did not kill this person. They dismiss. They did their due diligence, and they did their like interrogations, and they cleared like 50 people who were just like off their rocker and who were confessing to something they hadn't done.
you posed a question on the Google Doc, and I actually have an answer for it. Do
Okay.
you want it?
Yeah.
It's super
Give me the
nerdy.
answer. How
So-
did they know better in the 1940s how to look up, how to assess whether or not this is a false confession than they
Right.
did in the 1990s, where
Well,
every confession was considered a real
was
confession.
considered. So not necessarily how to interpret a false confession as being false, but how many like you can usually tell, like with this woman, right? Like she came forward, the first thing she did was tell the press, and then she told the police, right? So and she only had details that were known in the papers and stuff like that. So you would hope that most cops, even crappy ones, would be able to write those off. But the primary difference is not so much in those like giant weird crazy people false confessions as how do we end up with false confessions like with Jason Carroll, right? And the answer to that question is what was developed in the late 40s and early 50s, the Reed technique.
The Reed technique, yeah.
And that changed the face of interview, and that's how we ended up with quite frankly so many false confessions that just started piling up after that. And it got it was always pretty brutal back then. There were a lot of people beaten into confessions, even in the 30s and 40s. But it became a lot more manipulative once Reed came onto the scene.
So I was kind of gobsmacked when I read that that Woodrow Guthrie, who wrote "This Land Is Your Land," was considered a serious suspect at one time.
But he was a suspect because he basically violated, what was it, the Comstock Act? Like he was sending supposedly pornographic material through the mail. And that was like why
he was stalking this woman.
Right. He had been stalking. And then they said they pulled him in on the federal crime of like sending pornography through the mail. So, and then
I love it when they do that.
Yeah, he was cleared. He was cleared because he was not in the area at the time. You know what I mean? Like he was not even in the state or anything, so they were able to clear him.
I didn't know.
I just always like it when they get a backdoor, when they get like I like it when they backdoor. Okay, I'll be hearing that on repeat from hi guys. No, I like
Joey
and backdoors.
Exactly. Well, no, like they got Al Capone on tax evasion.
Yeah.
Like I love those things when they're like that's the thing we can get him in on. But the suspect list, though. The main suspect list reads Maurice Clement, Salvador Torres Vera, Marvin Margolis, Glenn Wolfe. This says a Chicago police officer. But there are some main ones that keep coming up that a lot of people come back to. There are podcasts about it. Who is your number one person you want to talk about, Sarah? Actually, no, wait, scratch that. Who is the person that comes up in the conversation that you're like, why is this person coming up? This is such a hard no, but their name keeps coming up because there are several of them.
I mean, the one that comes up that I'm just like, no, stop that, is Ed Edwards, who was a serial killer. But he was a bad dude. He did horrible things, but he is somebody and we've had a few of these, and we're probably going to talk about one, where this person's adult child later came forward and said, I believe my father did this. Now, he did not just say that he did Dahlia. In addition to the crimes that he's known for, they have attributed everything from Black Dahlia to JonBenet Ramsey and the Zodiac Killer to this one person. And
Actually, and Lacey Peterson.
Oh my God, I forgot about Lacey. My bad. And that is always, like, you want to talk about a pet peeve of mine, this idea that, like, we can take all of these horrible cases and ascribe them to only a few people.
That happens with Israel Keys too.
It happens
Maura
with Israel
Murray,
Keys.
that happens all the time. It's a very easy way to make your brain go to the scariest place and solve it. Great, it was Israel Keys and he's gone,
Exactly. And I think it gives people, I mean, like, true crime gets blamed all the time for making women afraid all the time. I think if you are thinking that there are like 5 people who have committed all the famous serial murders, then you are walking around with a false sense of security.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot more of them.
Sarah's like, there's serial killers everywhere. They're just
there
everywhere.
kind of are.
Look, I mean, like,
so many people have never heard of.
At the top of the episode, we talked about why this case was so notorious and had such the memory of it just won't, and people are obsessed with it. And you said because it was so horrific, but I remember we talked about possible suspects, and you brought up the Cleveland torso murders, and I said, what? I mean, so that was a thing. Apparently, 7 San Diego women had been like murdered and mutilated, like in the years leading up to it. Very shortly after Elizabeth's murder, there was the killing of the red lipstick murder, as it's dubbed, of Jean French, and she was a naked corpse found in a vacant lot in L.A. I mean, like literally, I think like the next month, right after.
Yeah, that one feels awfully close, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Like that's the thing is, I think, and on those San Diego ones, I looked through those, and some of them to me don't even feel like they're connected to each other necessarily. Like they're just too far afield. I mean, people will. Some of these guys work very chaotically. You look at like Richard Ramirez or even Bundy, right, where they use all these different methods and they, you know what I mean? They kind of like vary around. So you can't, and they'll vary in who they choose. Israel Keys is one where like there's just no way to identify who he's going to pick. But with this one, because it's so specific and the signature is so specific, the MO would almost have to match, like that. You know what I mean? So the San Diego one, but there are a couple in there that I'm like, oh, that feels like that those might be connected to each other and could be connected to this one. Honestly, if we're talking though about the far afield ones, the Cleveland torso killer is the one that for me rings the closest as being a like, okay, I know I just said that we can't connect all of these serials to each other, and this is one in Cleveland and this is in LA, but this guy, he's unsolved, but this particular killer, the cases were linked to other cases in Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and then Dahlia, and they do really look similar, not just in the presentation, but in like...
Don't any of those cases have like DNA somewhere in a vault that we can like now use with genetic
yes,
genealogy?
I don't understand the Cleveland torso murders. I keep asking about that. Like why there's so much evidence left on there. I'm pretty sure there's evidence left with Dahlia. Like why are we not testing for touch DNA? Maybe it's degraded, but maybe it's not, you know?
I mean, that was the Cleveland torso killers, which that, by the way, we're not giving that a fancy name. That is an unidentified person. We don't know who that is. And it's 12 people officially. 13. Okay. That they have linked to it. And that was in the 1930s. But would it be fair to say, by both of your estimations, that this had to have been done by someone with some medical training because of you don't think that because of the precision of the cutting.
That was like kind of a leading theory of the investigators always, right?
What about the draining of the blood? Because
that is very, very specific, which like an embalmer can do. Why do you say no? Because I thought that was the thing. I was like, well, you have to be dealing with a highly
How do
sophisticated
you even
person.
drain blood out of an entire body? It's a lot of blood.
Yeah. Well, people who do it who embalm, right?
And people who do it who hunt. If you've ever gone deer hunting, you have exsanguinated a creature.
Have you deer hunted, Sarah?
I have not, but my daughter's father, my ex-husband from many moons ago, is a very very ethical, avid hunter. He literally lives in a forest. He consumes all of his meat. I don't want to like have PETA coming after me or whatever.
Yeah.
No,
I know the process from the time that we were together. I know what that entails. But even that being said,
tell me why, because I was really on that it had to be a medical professional. So tell me why that's mishigas and fake news.
I'm grinning like crazy over here because every mutilation murder I have ever seen, including ones that I have participated in the investigation in some capacity or another, at some point the theory is it has to be a medical doctor, a medical student, or a butcher. That is the other one that always comes up, right? And they always say like, oh, because of the precision and because of X and because of Y. And I have now, again, there are two good doctor suspects for this case, including the lead suspect in the Cleveland torso murders. And this one, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about the other one. But in cases where we have then later identified the killer, it has never been a doctor, even in these ones where everybody was like positive. And, part of my...
precise.
It's so precise. And like, my origin story, Danny Rolling, the Gainesville student murders, I was 15 the summer that happened, and the lead suspect for months and months and months was a pre-med student named Ed Humphreys. Oh. And part of that, the reason that was given to us, I mean, he did a lot to make himself a suspect, up to and including saying, I'm pretty sure I have information about the cases, that wasn't helping him any. Yeah. But part of the explanation that I remember reading in the newspaper was that a particular muscle had been carved out of one of the victim's calves. And it was so specific and so perfect that it could only be in a spot that somebody with a scalpel who knew anatomy would be able to do it. Danny Rolling didn't know shit. And like the guy who ultimately, turned out to be the killer, it doesn't have to be that. And with this one in particular, the thing that everybody attributes that to, and here's where I'm going to say the word wrong, hemicorporectomy, right? Yeah, so where she was bisected. All right, two things. If you as a layperson were going to, sorry to be crass, but carve a body in half, wouldn't you just do it at the belly button or right above the belly button? Like that's where this is. The other thing is everybody attributes this because of one particular doctor, and they're saying like, oh, he had this training and stuff. Maybe there's information out there that I have not been able to find. The only thing I can find, and according to the National Institutes of Health, the United States government's entire medical history, that procedure was not developed until 1951.
The hemicorporectomy thing.
Yeah, it was presented at a medical conference in 1951, and that was the first time it makes it into the medical lexicon.
Well, I think one of the reasons that it stood out was, that means that the killer knew how to do it before even doctors were trained in how to do it, because it was done in a way where it was the only point at which the body could have been severed into pieces without breaking any bone, apparently. So it seemed like it was a pretty precise location. But that takes us to who I think it seems like one of the most popular suspects. I don't know if that's the right term. And that is the doctor, Dr. George Hodel. And can we talk a little bit about him? Because I feel like you can't talk about this case and not talk about this guy.
Totally agree.
Okay.
I think... I always want to say at the outset, I do not dismiss Hodel. He said a lot of incriminating things. He absolutely sexually assaulted his daughter. He most likely murdered his own secretary because she was going to turn him in for fraud. He is a really, really awful human being. It seems like he probably, was committing incest against numerous victims within his own family. However... There is no link between them. And the only reason, I mean, that I have seen, again, this is a rabbit hole. There are plenty of things that I don't know about this case. But anything I have ever seen, the reason he was looked at was because he ran an STD clinic for the city of Los Angeles. And the assumption was if she was as big a slut as we think she is, she must have been treated for an STD at some point, and therefore she would have encountered him.
But he also had a reputation. He had a reputation, girl. It wasn't like...
Oh, no, he's awful. He's awful.
Right.
I'm not saying he
But
wasn't,
I'm saying,
but like...
Did the authorities know that reputation? They must have known. They're like, it's not just that he runs his clinic. This guy, like, is problematic. Yeah.
But how, like, what is the link between them? There is no link between them. And some of the evidence that, again, that people cite is this stuff with the surgery. They're like, oh, he knew how to do this surgery years earlier. And I'm kind of like, how? No, surgery wasn't developed at that point. Now, again, that could be wrong. I'm definitely not an expert in this case, but it also, one of the things cited is like the removal, the excising of her breast. Well, you can see the breast there. So unless somebody's just misusing the term excising, you can see it in the photographs, the unfortunate photographs.
Like part of it's been removed. Yeah.
It's been peeled, which sounds terrible, but it's not taken
completely
off of her body. Right.
It's weird. Like when you read the reports, like there are reports in the FBI files where it's like the breast has been removed and then another place. But like you said, you can actually see the photograph. So it's a little confusing.
Yeah.
Unless that person writing the report doesn't know what a breast looks like. I don't even know how to understand
or
that.
Was it completely cut off and then placed back on? That's, like and that's what we're seeing in the photo. Maybe. It's really, it's hard to know. It's really hard to know.
The person who's convinced that it was definitely Dr. George Hodel is his son, Steve Hodel, who is a retired police officer, right?
He's a retired homicide detective. Yeah, which I lend a lot of credence to.
Yeah. And listen, you can find if you want a rabbit hole, go to his website.
Yeah.
SteveHodel.com. Holy moly, there is
I think
lot
he's written
there.
3 or 4 books.
Yes, he's convinced for lots of different reasons. Some of the things, like it all started where he was going through his dad's stuff, and he found a picture of a woman that looked to him an awful lot like Elizabeth Short, and then from there it just kind of kept going. Then he found receipts for cement bags, and then he did handwriting comparison. We didn't even talk about like the handwriting, the letters, the crazy stuff. I mean,
the letters.
The LAPD got they got like a package that had those, literally this what you see in the movies, the serial killer cut out letters from magazines or whatever in a letter, and many of her personal items, which is interesting because like they got a package with all these personal items of hers, including her birth certificate and a diary and all this stuff.
I would bet you dollars to donuts reporters bought that from her roommates or bought that from somebody.
Yeah, probably. One of the reasons, actually, that diary of hers, which is, or when I say diary, I don't mean like a journal. I mean like the way people use
kind of
an address book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it did have the name of like dozens of men and numbers, and I think that was another reason that the rumors around her started, that she was just like having like a lot of different relationships.
Now that guy though, the guy whose name is actually embossed on the address book, who it was like his property, but she was staying with him through a friend, and so he gave it to her or whatever, and she used it as her address book, was a guy named Mark Hansen. And that is a guy who we're not talking Chris Hansen. This is a guy who had apparently made multiple overtures on her, who, according to her friends, she had not only, declined his advances, but this was the guy who her friends told the police, you need to really look at him. Mm-hmm. We were afraid of him. She was afraid of him.
But she was staying with him.
She said briefly. This was another one. And it wasn't like she knew him through a friend. It was one of these, like, she needed a place to stay and a friend. And he had multiple people staying at his house. He was, my understanding, fairly well off. It was a great big house with lots of rooms.
Okay. Well, there's also, Dr. Hodel became a serious enough suspect that he got bugged.
Yep.
His telephone and I think his residence maybe was bugged. And there is a part of one of the transcripts, I'm like, well, this seems a little incriminating, in which Hodel is talking to somebody and he says, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead.
Yeah, that's the one that gets me too, where I just keep coming back and I'm like, I know we always say like, oh, I would never say this, I would never confess, and you don't know all that stuff. But like, what is the psychology behind using the term, they can't prove it now?
Yeah.
without it meaning exactly what it sounds like. That is the one I always come back to too, where I'm like, I could never dismiss this guy.
Yeah, can't be dismissed. But then I mean I think the thing about, and like you said, he is a retired homicide detective, Steve Hodel, but then he does seem to take it further than that. He's like, not only did he kill the Black Dahlia, he's also the Zodiac killer. My dad's a Zodiac killer, and so that's where. But I think he's apparently still compiling evidence to that effect. I don't know.
That's my
Why does-
understanding.
Why does everyone want to be the Zodiac?
Because that's
Why
the other. Why does everybody
everybody-
want to be the son of the Zodiac? That's what always happens.
Everybody wants to be like, also, you know what? Let's throw the Zodiac in there too. It always comes back to the Zodiac.
Always. So I'm gonna make a liar out of myself when I'm like, nah, I don't think it was a doctor. But Rabia, and if you look at the Google Doc that you had shared with me, right? So one of I at the very bottom of the Google Doc, I added a photo that was pulled out of the FBI files, and
yeah.
somebody sent an anonymous letter to the FBI, and it said, if you want to find the Black Dahlia killer, look for this guy. And there's a drawing. This person
That's
is quite
Hodel.
a good drawing. So, well, but look who's on the right. That's the main suspect in the Cleveland Torso Killers, who
holy
looks
shit.
exactly like Hodel. It's crazy.
Oh
To
my
be
God.
Isn't that
fair, all
funny?
the men in the 30s and 40s kind of look
They do
like
kind of,
miscellaneous.
but I mean,
They're kind of-
you should look at this document. You guys put this up on Facebook. Like, it is bananas how much both of these men look like each other and look like this drawing.
I think
Yeah.
they're all a little bit related. When Daisy Egan was doing her stuff on the Alcatraz and she was talking about all the men in Alcatraz, I was like, are they all brothers?
Yeah.
They all kind of just have a plain sort of face. I really, really went in deep with George Hodel again. What is wrong with me?
Well, I don't know.
That sounds awful. But everything a lot of people will just say he's just a creepy dude. I'm like,
Oh, he's beyond
no.
creepy. He's
beyond
equally
creepy.
awful.
Creepy.
He's
Yeah.
he's a serial sexual assaulter. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that. There's no doubt about that.
I think if you are mentally capable to sexually assault your daughter, you absolutely can take a life. Because basically that is like taking someone's life, taking someone's innocence.
Absolutely, you're capable of it, but we do also know that these are kind of like two different, often, not always, two different types of
Yeah.
offenders, right? So it doesn't one
But-
does not necessarily follow the other.
Sure, but I do think that sexual assault is really about control.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think this murderer was very, very much into the controlling, the dramatic nature of this murder. It seemed like very, very much a control freak as well.
Oh, absolutely. And we will always see they escalate from usually from some type of domestic violence, right? Like either within their own home growing up or then in a relationship, then they escalate to sexual violence and then they escalate to homicide. Like, yeah, of course that's a rung on the ladder for these guys.
Look, I if you guys want to go down the rabbit hole of Dr. George Hodel, there is a lot there. Again, you can find a lot of it. You know, Steve Hodel has written, I think, probably thousands of pages, and like
Yeah.
I think this is his entire life is to try to prove this. But you know, you said something earlier, which I think actually might not be right, and that is that there must be some evidence in this case that could be like touch DNA, but what could have been? Like the cement bag, like there's two bags, right, that were found near her body. Nothing on the body. I mean, the body's gone anyway, obviously. She's
Yeah.
been buried and gone. I mean, I don't know if she was buried or cremated, but that there's nothing there. There's no clothing that was found. There's no personal
No,
items.
her shoes
They have
and
the-
her purse
The purse
were
and the
Were
shoes,
they?
were
yeah.
found. Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know
one
that.
of her shoes and her purse were found.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll
I
send you a
agree.
picture, Rabia. I have a picture
It's
of that.
high. It was really cute too. It was a black suede pump. It was really cute.
Yeah, and the purse is
It's on point. But you're absolutely right. It is pretty unlikely. But also, this is a police agency that their budget is in billions with a B. So like, what's a few $1,000s to throw at some testing?
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's true. Well, let me ask you this, because we've had you on for a while now. I mean, like we're going into the end of our second hour, and so I want to ask you: do you think this case can ever actually be solved?
Honestly, no. I think it's entirely possible that they interviewed the killer at some point in the process and may have dismissed them too early. We didn't, I don't want to like keep going at this obviously because everybody has their pet theories, but there was a guy, I think Patrick O'Reilly was his name, who they briefly interviewed. He had a history of escalating sexual violence, and he nearly beat a woman to death who he was on a date with. He abducted her, took her to a hotel, and beat her nearly to death. And he specifically said, no, it was enjoyable to watch her in this. And so, like, this was a guy who knew Elizabeth, and they did not really follow that through. I also am not sure that Red Manley should be. You know what I mean? We're just
we didn't even talk about him.
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
guy
that was
she
her
was last
boyfriend.
seen with.
Yep.
That was a guy she had dated for a couple of days. But
Right.
he
was alibied by his wife, right? He was married, alibied by his wife.
Yeah. I just feel like
But she also was seen in the hotel after he dropped her off. He said he dropped her off the Biltmore, and then she was seen by witness in the hotel without him.
Was she? Because,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. Like, I've seen stuff that says they saw her at a cafe a couple of blocks away about an hour later, but I don't know how reliable those are, because there was also a guy who came forward and said, I absolutely 100% saw her on the, like, whatever it was, the 13th or 14th. She bought a train ticket here, blah, blah, blah. And then a woman came forward and said, no, that was me.
Yeah.
And they went to the train station with her, and he was like, oh, my bad.
Yeah.
You're right. It wasn't her. And so, we all know that eyewitness testimony is the least reliable.
Yeah.
So we really have no proof of life from her after she's with Red Manley. Not even at the hotel.
Oh boy. I don't know. I guess we're not solving the mystery this episode.
I know. I'm sorry. I feel like I did not do my job.
No.
It is a rabbit hole. That's why when Rabia told me you wanted to cover this, I was like, no, I don't want it so much. Okay, but
sorry. And you guys moderating your Facebook page, I'm sure it's going to be blowing up with like, do you know this? Do you know this? Do you know
it's
this?
so much. I mean, that we get that all the time.
We
People
barely
are like,
scratched the surface of this case.
Barely
To be clear, barely scratched the surface. Like in
we'll
our
have to have our couple more things is going to be another hour and a half long episode. But if you had to throw some cuffs on somebody, their ghost right now, you had to, who would it be?
I don't know. I've spent too much time working with Rabia to throw cuffs on even a ghost that I'm not 100%
Sarah's
sure
so
about.
cautious. She's a great investigator, and
promise
she
you
will
they
not.
don't.
Listen,
I promise you they don't listen to the show. I promise. You can't get any defamation charges.
I want to go back and spend a lot more time with Red Manley, and I want to spend time investigating Patrick O'Reilly, and I, I think those two are certainly worth spending some time with.
And I want to know, what kind of places do these people have access to? They had to have a place to keep
they
her
had to have
and
a place
kill
to
her
keep her
and drain
wash
her and wash her. So I'm like, Hodel seems like a good one for. I mean, this man's got all kinds of like medical, I know you said it doesn't necessarily mean it's a doctor, but
it
beyond
doesn't mean
that,
it's necessarily, but it also doesn't mean it's not. And it's the same thing. So Francis Sweeney is the doctor who's the Elliot Ness was positive that Francis Sweeney was the Cleveland torso killer. And Sweeney was also not only a doctor, but like worked most of the time in a morgue that was like in the neighborhood where the bulk of the Cleveland torso killings were happening. And he worked at night. And so like what better time to exsanguinate, to dismember, to wash bodies, and then to put them places,
Yeah.
I do, before we leave, I do want to talk about something that Sarah and I were talking about before you popped on, Rabia. Rabia was having technical difficulties today, poor thing. This is a case that really, and I know Sarah will agree with me, it upsets me because I do feel like so many people know this case and just it's kind of like an earworm, like you've heard it before, but nobody knows who Elizabeth Short is. And we spoke about that briefly in the Amanda Knox episode, the Meredith Kercher episode, because if you ask someone who is Meredith Kercher, they don't know. And if you say who's Amanda Knox, they most certainly know. So I do think there is a part of me that's really sad that this story of this young girl trying to find herself, trying to start a career, trying to fall in love, trying to do all the things that we all want to do in our life. She was beautiful. She was just trying to make her way. And she was a human and she had family. And
she's kind of left with this little cute name. Oh, the Black Dahlia. Well, her name was Elizabeth Short, and she was suffered a horrible, horrible death. I actually saw someone with her deceased face tattooed on their arm.
I've
Oh
seen
my
that.
God.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen that a lot. It's awful.
Because it seems like it's from a movie, and it's not a movie. It was a girl, and the amount that she must have suffered, she did not die quickly.
No.
And that is really sad. And I think that her name is lost in so many times with all these, the Night Stalker and all these names that are coined for these people. I think the bad guys should be called, Dickweed Kills a Lot. And I think that the victims should always be called by name. I do understand it, and I understand it from a media standpoint, but my heart hurts when I hear that.
Well, and I think we know all we need to know about the way the case was handled. Rabia, you started this out saying, like, why did this go south so bad? Why did the police have perceptions that then the public had? If you go through the FBI files, which almost anybody can get them now, you can download them from different sites.
Sarah, you need to come back, and we need to record our Patreon. It is truly, truly just the surface. I don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah. But I want, before you dip out, I want folks to know where they can find you. You did mention a couple times you do these amazing live shows, which I have gone to a couple of them. They're so, so, so good. Sarah, you're an incredible presenter. Listen, and for folks who have not yet heard Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom, I remember when I listened to the first episode, and what I texted Sarah, I said, this is the best written research.
She said that to me.
Yeah. Scripted, narrated podcast episode I have ever heard. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it is brilliant. You are brilliant. Go to her shows. Where can they find you? Where can they find information about what you're doing?
That is very kind. Thank you. The podcast is Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom? And you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. So all of the different platforms. You can find me primarily these days on social media. I'm hanging out on Instagram, and it's just my name backwards, Cailean Sarah. And I will, as I'm allowed to, I post case updates when I have them or when we're allowed to speak about stuff. I can say it's ongoing. But you can also, if you follow me on Instagram, then you will get notices for when I'm going to be doing live events in your area. I do them all over the country. They're I like to think of them as fun and educational. Like I make people eat broccoli. You're going to learn something, but I pour cheese all over it. So, and I typically do them in breweries and bars. So everybody gets a little bit lit, and we talk about criminal psychology, and we talk about historical cases, and it's a lot of fun. So
They're so good. They're so
And
good.
for
And her
those of
merch
you
is
who
great
missed-
too. Love your merch.
Oh, nice. And for those of you who missed our live with Sarah, she absolutely disagreed with Rabia and I about the intruder theory. So go back to our live, which is on our grid, about the JonBenet Ramsey case. Well, we should also do a couple more things about that. We should record that for the Patreon with you, because that was a great
such
chat.
a masochist. Like, you were just inviting like all the controversy right back in. Do you want to talk about Scott Peterson again? Let's.
That's the one thing she won't. I do. She won't talk
Sarah,
about that.
we love you. We'll definitely
you
have
so
some more
much.
chats with you on the Patreon. And I know that you are probably our most informed guest, which I'm sure our listeners are going to absolutely love.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on SpeakPipe, www.speakpipe.com/solvethecase. You can actually also direct questions to Sarah, because I'll bet if we twist her arm, she will answer it for you on our Patreon. And you can find us on all platforms. Rabia and Ellyn, where can they find you, Rabia?
I am on Instagram at Rabia2, and on Twitter at Rabia. But like Sarah, I'm barely on Twitter. It's really hurtful now. It's just really hard to be there. But
And
yeah.
you guys really take a look at Rabia's socials, because she just figured out how to put a link on her
Shut up.
stories.
Just shut up.
And I'm just really, really proud of her.
You know what? When I sent that to Ellen, she didn't even respond to give me any affirmation or a pat on the back. Nothing. I got nothing.
You are too accomplished, Rabia. You don't need such such like silly praise from me. We are so happy that you have joined us for this conversation. Please join our Facebook group for more, because I'm sure there'll be lots coming up about this case.
And Sarah's there. Sarah's in the Facebook group, so people can find you there too.
I am a fan of the show, friend of the show, friend of the
We
podcast.
love you.
Heck yeah. And ask her all of her questions. And until then, we'll see you soon.
Bye, guys. Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Enjoy your pho.
Bye, thank you. I will.
All right. Good night.